good night, everybody. I was
Good night,
intent on
Maxine.
listening to Glenn and
Yes.
um, getting some information as I listen, because I know we are talking about the Afrexim Bank and government's actions. And for me, when you say over to, okay, let me just settle my head, because as I said, I normally am made aware that I'm coming in. So, and I've been dealing with a million and one things as I listen. There are a lot of things here, but let me start by saying, and I think this is the common position, that as of this moment, Barbadians do not know what the government of Mayor Motley has agreed to in relation to this bank. Wait, sorry, I'm getting some feedback from somewhere. I think somebody thought I had disconnect, or that was
No.
that coming from you. I'm not sure. I'm hearing some sound, so I thought it was either my cell phone, which was ringing just before I came on my
Yeah.
tablet. I usually watch on my tablet, so that I don't mess up my computer. Yeah, as I was saying, my concern really coming out of all that I've been hearing, and I'm gonna go. I hope Dave received it. I sent an article from an article written, I guess, of an interview with the former international business minister Don Venice, my colleague. His comments about this, and it is unfortunate that in all that has happened, including a groundbreaking, no Barbadian has been able to say definitively what have we given to this entity, to this import-export bank, because we're seeing images of what we can expect to go up on the location in Gemens Lane. And frankly, I believe that is part of what I think I heard Glenn saying, that what appears to be there is a construction of a hotel for the most part, you know. And if that is the case, I mean, a headquarters of a bank, a regional headquarters, let me correct myself. A regional headquarters of a bank is highly unlikely to require all of this. They did tell you there's a hotel, which is a commercial activity. The Caribbean Development Bank, which has been given headquarters agreements and subject to privileges and immunities, is essentially that a set of an office complex which supports the work of a regional development institution. And really and truly, I am not. Look at what it says here. And it says here, Africa and Barbados forge historic trade alliance. An import-export bank is about, at the heart of it, the facilitation of trade, you know, and so to cover all of this under the same kind of blanket that you cover the and you want to say this is like the CDB, is wrong. So I asked for two things. One, that the government provide to citizens of this country and at home and abroad, and to the world who would want to know, what exactly have you agreed to, and what exactly are we going to have here? And if, for example, you are offering privileges and immunities, and it were a development bank, notice what I said, and it were a development bank, and you could make a case for similar, if not the full package, because that is something we would have to look at. Does it cover your commercial operation, your hotel? It should not. You understand what I'm saying? So we don't know what really is obtaining. And if I could, I mean, I think, in fact, one of the things I looked at as I was listening to you earlier, Marcia, because I was looking to see, because I know that there's an African Development Bank. And I came across an interesting article before I go to the article with Minister Innes, because I think some of the things that I would have highlighted there, Glenn touched on, and I believe, I can reiterate them. But I came across this article written on the 1st of July, 2021, assuming that they have it in December. I believe this is as an African article. And it says Abidjan, Cairo, Amsterdam, 7 January 2021. The African Export-Import Bank Afrexim Bank, together with its partners, the African Development Bank, AFDB, and FCI, announced the creation of a special purpose grant authorized and funded by the AFDB's trust fund to support the capacity building of emerging factoring firms in Africa that will benefit many SMEs across Africa. The grant will be mobilized by the African Private Sector Assistance, FAPA, a bilateral multi-donor fund, and will allow FCI and Afrexim Bank to increase its positive impact on the African population and support its mission to grow factoring in the African continent. I've read those two paragraphs simply to say that part of what this will tell you if you get into the article is that this is a profit-making commercial bank. And when I say commercial, I said it on this program before, we're not talking about a bank that deals with what we call consumer banking. This is a bank that fosters trade and business activity, and that has to be stressed. And I would say on that basis, I have absolutely no problem with a Afrexim Bank operating in the hemisphere and choosing to headquarter in Barbados. What I have absolute problems with is a government trying to bamboozle Barbadians into believing that this operation is of a nature that it does what it does. And you have information which you said you will share later, and we will get to hear that. Because really and truly, and this is where, Dave, if we can go to the article, the interview with Minister Innes, I think it will reinforce some of these things. And I say this against the background of the role that Mr. Innes played before he went into politics, when he was into international business as an entrepreneur himself. And as he said here, I'll quickly go through, he expressed a blend of cautious optimism and concern regarding the establishment of the bank, calling for transparency and clarity from government. And I think that is critical. Tell us exactly what we're doing. He went on to say that we need foreign investment, and we all agree on that, but we still do not know the terms. He says, and there's a quote attributed to him, I don't think we can be criticizing the bank being located in Barbados, but the question is, and I think this is what Glenn and everybody else is asking, what will the people of Barbados get in return? And I heard them talk about jobs and so on, but the truth is, in an operation like this, the direct, well, that is the bank, because we have to separate out the other things. The bank, you will have a set of professionals and so on, but it's not the headquarters of the bank, it's a regional headquarters, you know. But important is the next question, what is the suite of incentives that have been offered to this bank to get them here, okay? And he goes on to talk about, and I want to make this point because we have to put these things into context. And one of the context that he has identified is the fact that here we are, and Glenn gave us an estimated cost of the land, valuation of the land, and the price that it would fetch. We heard that before, and I think, Marcia, you might have noted it from Glenn tonight. And so we're talking about a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars. But here we are at the time that we are saying, here's a gift, and I do not care to, well, I shouldn't say I don't care. I have not heard from any of the government officials a proper explanation as to why we would give away so much of our patrimony, what is important to us, especially at a time, but then that you are selling or threatening to sell properties of people. This is what Don Villinis was reminding us, that we had an auction last week, days ago, where initially I believe the public relations officer of the Barbados Revenue Authority, the BRA, was saying that initially they had about 20 properties, to 29 properties to auction, and so on. And so that was one of the things that I would have indicated there. So you're doing all of this, but if you go on, then there's a note that that was raised, and I presume Dave didn't get the one because I had highlighted the areas that when I emailed it that I wanted to. But if you come down a little bit, it talks about the former minister. So come down a little bit. The former minister raised critical questions regarding the privileges and immunities granted to a private for-profit bank such as the Afrexim Bank. And that is what we're talking about. He goes on to mention the context or the framework within which privileges and immunities are concerned. And while I don't have the time to go into it, the Vienna Convention, which is really an agreement between nations, organized by the UN and so on, it was done to ensure, how countries engage each other. And so I would want the government, because I don't think that we, Marcia, well, we can do it, and we will certainly keep this matter alive. But I would like the government to show us where, consistent with the Vienna Convention, that it is able, using the normal conventions and practices, the normal ways of doing things. I don't want to use the word convention twice, but the normal way of doing things, that this is really something that is normal, because really and truly, when we talk about diplomatic privileges and immunities, we are talking about ways in which we ensure that diplomats, representatives of country A in country B, D, F, and G, and C are in places like United Nations, World Trade Organization, etc., that diplomats can perform their duties effectively by granting them certain exemptions and protections. Let me go over that again. When we talk about privileges and diplomatic privileges and immunities, they are intended for diplomats. And what this says in relation to the CDB is that we have given the officials of the CDB working in Barbados as the headquarters of an important CARICOM institution, we have bestowed on them certain diplomatic privileges and immunities. And my question is, why are we treating the officials of a commercial entity, because I have seen nothing to say it is otherwise, it is a commercial entity with broad shareholding. And my question is, why are we giving such privileges, etc., treating them as diplomats? And therefore I am not the expert. When I was foreign minister, I was not the expert, and I relied on the technocrats, the people who were seasoned in diplomacy, trained and hired as public officials to confirm my understanding, notwithstanding my training, right? So I want the government to come and tell us, beyond a shadow of a doubt, what is the reason for ascribing this kind of arrangement to them. I can understand incentives, and I understand the context in which incentives are given. Incentives are given to officials of the United Nations because this whole notion of diplomacy, as I would have said on multiple occasions on this show, takes place within the framework of bilateral relations, government to government. Therefore, you have the U.S. Embassy here. Therefore, we have a Cuban embassy, and vice versa. We have an embassy in Cuba. We have consulates in the U.S., and we have an embassy in Washington. And this is how it applies. And therefore, what we do is, as just to finish it again, it says, and I read the whole sentence: diplomatic privilege and immunities as outlined in the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations ensure diplomats can perform their duties effectively by granting them certain exemptions and protections from the laws and jurisdictions of the host country. And so my question is, what makes these people diplomats? Now, there are a couple of things that, and I am conscious of the time we have, Marcia. So
but you do have another 9 minutes, Ms.
Okay,
McClean.
because I just want to be sure.
Yeah.
So in essence, if we continue with the article by Mr. Innes, the interview rather, he went on to say that the government must be careful, and I had highlighted this, and so I'll read it because people would have seen the article circulating. The government must be careful that it is not setting a very dangerous precedent where employees of a foreign-owned private entity are not only benefiting from tax-free status, but also a right not to be arrested, special license plates, because we have something we call them CD plates, where we see embassies, etc. Such as and such like. This bank is more akin to Scotiabank or First Caribbean than is the CDB. And I want to suggest that that is an important consideration. So in essence, there are a couple other things I want to say because, as I listen, I thought I would respond to share something because the fact that it is, you mentioned China. China is a member of the CDB. China is a member of CDB along with Brazil, Canada. That's what I was writing when I came on, because I checked it. Brazil, China, Canada, Colombia, Germany, Italy, Mexico, the United Kingdom, and Venezuela. Of course, these people are non-born members, but they make contributions. But again, that's a development bank. Now, the Chinese, and I want to say this because I know that we hear China, some people get a little antsy or concerned. China has, in terms of liquid assets and so on, it does have a lot of money. Unlike the Americans, who have emphasized military engagement as a major part of their foreign relations, the Chinese have focused on economic relations. And in fact, interestingly enough, as I was listening, I think it was to Adrian, I don't know if people know this, but over the past 20 years or so, between Japan and China, they own about 44% of the foreign owned U.S. debt. So in other words, when the American government puts out its government paper, treasury notes, and all however they denominate it, two countries control about 44% of that, Japan and China. And in fact, in about 2024, the Chinese had about $800 billion in U.S. government paper. So part of my concern is that when we look at it, we need not to, or we need, let me put, as you know, I always say speak positively. We need to break these things out in pieces so that we do not let the government escape the scrutiny that we want. The Chinese as a major player, in fact, there's a contestation between the Americans and the Chinese. And I'm going to say something about the article by Guy Hewitt in a minute. The Chinese and the Americans have been jockeying for the longest while to be the dominant player in global diplomacy and global politics. The Chinese have done it by their Belt and Road Initiative. And as I say to people as a former foreign minister, it is up to countries large and small to determine how they engage the Chinese, because at the end of the day, they're not going anywhere. And what they have done in this part of the world, and the Americans now are trying to reverse it, they ignored us forever, took us for granted, let me put it that way, and created an opportunity for somebody further away to come and get involved. But nobody comes to a government in Barbados, let me focus on Barbados, and tell us that we have to engage in a particular way. And that is why I am very firm in my call on this administration to tell us exactly what is going on in relation to this deal. I call it a sweetheart deal with the Afrixim. I get tongue-tied a bit, the Afrixim Bank, because it is not what it is being made out to be. But I tell people, until the government tells us, we are speculating, but we are pulling pieces together to recognize that there's a lot of things that will be revealed. There's a saying that we can hide and buy land, but we can't hide and work it. Whether it's translate into agriculture, commerce, construction, or whatever the case may be. There are a lot of things that have happened, and part of what we want to do is to recognize that there are ways to operate. And if I could use an analogy, we all remember the situation that arose from CL Financial in Trinidad. CL Financial was a financial conglomerate. At the heart of it, it was a private company. private. It was engaged. It had lots of investments in publicly traded companies, etc. But CL Financial was a private company. It had interest in Barbados, and I will use one that I was a director of Caribbean Commercial Bank for a number of years. But one of the things that was always made clear was that as a commercial bank operating in Barbados, we had to follow the rules of the central bank, the main regulator. The point I'm making is, even though you may have an entity where at its headquarters it is operating in ways that perhaps may sometimes conflict with the rules, it is for the jurisdictions in which they operate to do the right thing. And my concern is that before we even start with this Afrexim Bank, a number of things are not adding up. And I think that I would wrap up by going through what was shared in the article with Guy Hewitt, and I begin by looking at the second paragraph, because here he is speaking about two main things in this article. One is the unfortunate, tragic situation with the loss of life. And Marcia, I want to say thank you for the position you took about not filming yesterday. I think that to my mind, demonstrates your sensitivity to the importance of doing the right thing. You spoke about it yesterday, where, and there was some footage around about the raw emotions and so on. And I am happy that, as you said, it was not a matter of content gathering, but rather showing solidarity in the face of horrendous criminal activity, etc. But so in looking at this article, that captures that particular issue, but Barbados will always be my first love. And as a parent, he's talking about the whole devastating situation, but importantly, he's also talking about the requirement that we as Barbadians protect and preserve our children and generations to come. And his argument is, our nation is in trouble. It needs urgent care. It needs urgent care, Marcia, whether it is about tackling crime and violence and retaking our country and reinstilling the values which allowed us as citizens to survive and prosper even during the times when Barbados was a lot less prosperous. And if we go down to the section there where it says core purpose of life, Reverend Hewitt, in the second paragraph under that, he says, how do our young people find meaning given the high levels of family dysfunction, community and social erosion? And I'm going to stop there for a minute because I want to link this comment, which, as I said in this article, speaks to two very topical developments in this country. The continuing concern about crime and violence, but the heart-wrenching situation that has brought home in no uncertain terms to Barbados, if it didn't happen before, the serious situation we are in. And I say this to the government. We cannot separate out the pieces of what is happening in this country. And at the apex of the country is a government. And if the people cannot feel comfortable that they can trust the government, then we will have the kinds of alienation, the kinds of frustration, the kinds of negative reactions that we are getting. In other words, what I just heard an echo. Sorry, I was just hearing myself repeated. What is happening is an increasing lack of trust and loss of confidence. And I believe that there are certain institutions and officials in a country that are seen or should be seen as exemplars. And so when we talk about the cloud that hangs over the details of the Afrexim Bank, and the continued, I should say, escalation, not only in numbers, but in the horrendous nature of criminal activity. We have to ask ourselves, if we start to look at the government in the way that people are doing that, how does that contribute to a general loss of standards, of behavior, of values, etc.? So I am saying, and I will stop on this note, Marcia, that when we discuss the issue of Gemma's Lane, the land there, the questions that go unanswered so far, we have to line those things up against the other things that are happening, where individual citizens are saying, well, hey, the government is better than we are, or they are worse than we are. Who are they to tell us how we should live our lives, what standards of behavior we should exhibit, when in fact, and I would use the word, it's not my word, but I have persons are saying, I mean, and they directed at me because I was a former government official. They talk about gangsters and gangsterism, you know, in very derogatory terms. And for me, when somebody uses, I have to stop and defend, not only defend myself, but defend the institution of government and those who lead. It would be the same thing if I heard people attack. In fact, I had a nice exchange. Well, I started an exchange, but I had to say I can't continue because I have to prepare for the Marcia Week show. When people start to talk about the church, you know, because again, and the church in its totality as a pillar of Christianity and godliness will come under attack. And if the church, and if that attack cannot be fought off in a way that says we should still have confidence in our church leaders and we can look and see what they're doing, etc. If that starts to fall away, think about it. What happens to the average citizen, to the average child? What do they have to look up to? The pause will come very soon. Don't better believe it. Within a 6 months to 9 months period. But anyhow, I know I just want to reiterate the point that I'm making, that at the heart of this is, as Glenn and Adrian Hines, I will make sure I get his name correct, said, we really need to hear from the government, because what we are hearing does not all go well. And I would want explored the information, the allegations that you've made in terms of those figures, because we know what we saw with the purchase of vaccine, or the attempted purchase of vaccines, and that matter came to light because it ended up in an American court, but we in Barbados had no detail until then. So I don't say no to any of these allegations, because we want to hear, and the best way to debunk an allegation is to put the truth on the table.
Yes.
Before they do,
I think
we'll be able to get our data nevertheless.
But the question I would ask the caller is whether or not something addressed to the person came, because the letter doesn't have a name of a person. It's like a circular. So they could have paid the postman or a private courier to deliver them. So unless the person receives something addressed to them, it's just like you can pay somebody. We all are required to have mailboxes now. So somebody could have been paid, because this doesn't have a name of a person. So what the big problem though is, as we would have discussed on this show before, this information about closure and so on, if this is the one that speaks about closure of the road, should not come from the company, but unless this is a separate one. But this thing does not have anybody's name, so it could be like a circular, and some, either, as I said, the sent out by mail, to be delivered to residences in the vicinity, or a courier or somebody else doing it. Because what you raised, when you said so, I was very concerned, because they should not have information on citizens' names and addresses.
That's just my input.
Yes, thank you,
Marcia,
caller.
can I comment about that very quickly?
Yes.
Because the
Thank you,
term
caller.
cognitive dissonance is used in marketing to describe exactly what the caller said. You buy something or you buy into something, and then you discover it is not what you thought you were getting. And in terms of looking at it from the perspective of Barbadians and the voter, I think what the caller just touched on is if you think in terms of social marketing or political marketing. In marketing, you buy a product you're expecting that you are going to get X and Y, and then it doesn't happen, and so there's that this disconnect between reality and what was the expectation, and that is what's happening to a lot of citizens.
But back to Miss McClean.
All right, I wrote down here, Marcia, so that I'll be fairly quick. At the heart of all the issues we have been discussing are agreements about which Barbadians have no details and no information. And the consequential impact of these on our lives will be devastating. We need to let the government know that Barbadians will not take this anymore. Make your frustrations known and be out there Saturday and continuing, because this is very serious. We like to use the word existential threats. Try to picture Barbados with all of those changes that are proposed. Just close your eyes and think, or drive around Barbados. And I did some of that yesterday because I was on the road in a couple locations. And I just realized I had to pass Gemma's Lane in one instance. And I said to myself, imagine that this is gone. Imagine that government headquarters, geriatric hospital, and we can go on and on. So we have to say to the government, you're not telling us what you're doing. You're partly lying to us because the evidence is mounting. We have to show you. And if you want to call it, let me quickly say, if you want to call it a hate of investment, it is not a hate of investment. It is a hate of deception, dishonesty, and a failure to tell Barbadians the truth in advance, that we have to sit down and watch you. So we got to get up and walk.